Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. I'm Coach Mart. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. So guys, at the time of this recording, I have posted over 70 videos on the channel, and by far, it's not even close. This is the one that I'm most pumped up and excited to teach and to share with you. So welcome to Tactics, Recognition, and Training. So if you are the kind of player that maybe you have good calculation skills, maybe you have a pretty high, decent puzzle rating, but that doesn't necessarily translate over to being able to find tactics in your own games, then this video and this two-part mini-series is for you. So let's face it, everybody's puzzle rating is always a lot higher than their ELO. Why is that? Well, when you're presented with a puzzle, you know there's a solution, right? You know there's a move that's going to gain material, that's going to checkmate your king, something good is going to happen. But when you're playing in your own games, there's no alarm that goes off that says, puzzle alert, right? So I've had students that maybe their ELO is 900, but their puzzle rating is 2100, right? And so good news and bad news. Great. You have good calculation skills, but if you don't know when to apply, when to start looking for the tactics, it's like, what's the point, right? So my goal of this video is I'm going to teach you all of the different conditions that need to be met that triggers that alarm in your head to say, oh, now I'm going to treat this like a puzzle and start looking for tactics, even though one might not exist. So a quick little disclaimer before we get into the lesson is 2024, everybody wants that instant gratification, YouTube shorts, TikToks, right? Everybody likes to jump around, skip through videos and try to find the good stuff, right? So everybody wants 5 hours of lessons crammed into one 45-second video. Well, this is not one of those, right? So if you had to choose one video out of all the videos on this channel where you're going to commit to it and watch it from start to finish, this is the one. This has completely changed the way I thought about chess and tactics when I finally realized and understood these concepts. And I promise you that it'll do the same for you. So make sure you watch the whole video, because the back half of the lesson, after I show you all the different conditions, I'm going to take you through a series of different training drills where we're going to look at positions one move at a time and start asking questions. Is this condition met? Is this condition met? Now, bingo, now's the time to start looking for tactics. So anything that you learn in life, you need to be an active participant in your learning, right? So guys, I'm going to have your hand on the mouse. I'm going to ask you to pause the video, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 times in this lesson. So every time I say pause the video, you really need to pause and think through these and actively participate. If you just watch a whole bunch of chess YouTube videos, that'll help, but your learning is limited, right? So make sure you're actively thinking through this stuff. So can't wait, guys. Let's go ahead and jump in and get started.
Here we go.
All right, guys, so here we go. As always, I have some notes down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So in part one of this mini-series, I'm actually only going to cover the first two conditions that need to be met in order to trigger that alert in your head to start looking for tactics. And condition number one is simply the location of your opponent's pieces. Now, some of this will be a little bit basic if you're an experienced player, but for those of you viewers that are brand new to chess, you might not be aware of this. So I am going to kind of speed through quickly, just take a few minutes on some of the Chess 101 basic stuff. But when we say location of your opponent's pieces, we're talking about two of your opponent's pieces being on the same straight line. That could be a vertical file, that could be a horizontal rank, that could be a diagonal. Maybe it's paying attention to the color of the squares that your opponent's pieces are on for potential knight forks, and specific squares that your own pieces want to occupy to put them in the best spot to be able to deliver some of these tactics. So when we're talking about straight lines, the three main tactics that we typically think of are your pins, your skewers, and your forks. So if we take a look at this classic example, we notice that the king and the knight are on the same straight vertical line, right? So we have the obvious rook e5, and that picks up the knight. Here we have a horizontal rank on the fifth rank, king and knight on the same straight line. We have rook e5, that picks up the knight. And here we have the king and the knight on the same straight line on the diagonal. Of course, we have bishop d4, and that picks up the knight. So those are three examples of forks. For the skewer is when you attack a piece, it moves out of the way and you take the piece behind it. You have that X-ray vision, kind of seeing through the piece. So here, knight and king on the same straight line. We have rook e1. King has to move out of the way. We take the knight. Here we have a horizontal straight line skewer. So rook h5, king has to move. We pick up the knight. And of course, same straight line on the diagonal. We have bishop g7. King moves, we pick up the knight. So that's three examples of skewer. And finally, we have the pin. Same straight line. We have rook to e8, Knight can't move. King moves, we pick up the knight. We have the same straight line on the 5th rank again. Knight a5 pins the knight. We pick up the knight there. And of course, we have the pin on the diagonal, bishop to b2. Okay, so that's just basic stuff. I think almost every chess player knows unless you're brand new to chess. Okay, so let's take a look. Those are only examples of a king and another piece, but of course it could just be any two of your opponent's pieces. Two bishops on the same straight line. So of course we have rook e3 that picks up one of the bishops. In this example, we notice that the king and the queen are on the same straight line. That's that's definitely a red flag for me in my games. When you have your heavy hitters, rooks, kings, and queens on the same straight lines, definitely some good opportunities to win the game with the correct tactic. Can we take advantage of this same straight line, the diagonal? Unfortunately, we cannot. We can't play bishop here because obviously the queen or the bishop would take that. But then we notice the queen and the bishop are on the same straight line on the 4th rank. We have the skewer, right? We have rook to h4. Queen can't take. There are no checking moves. Queen has to move somewhere, and we pick up the bishop, and white is completely winning. Okay, so in this example again, two pieces for white on the same straight line, and it's not too hard to see. Bishop to g7, that pins the rook. Queen moves, we pick up the rook, and this actually is winning for black. And a very rudimentary, elementary example of your basic pawn fork, right? Every pawn fork is going to be between two pieces on the same horizontal straight line, right? So we simply play pawn to d5, and that is your classic pawn fork. Okay, so let's graduate one level up from the basics, and let's talk about the pesky, unpredictable knight. So we just got through talking about straight lines. That does still apply to knight forks, of course, although not exclusively. And so that's because the knight does not move in a straight line. It moves as if a drunk person is walking after a 6-pack of beer. So that is definitely a knight move, right? So I put the little one knight h3 up at the top when I created that meme. The guy doesn't know where he's going or what he's doing. He goes up and hangs it right off to the side of the board. So if you play knight h3 on the first move of the game, you don't know what you're doing either, right? So if you never thought about this or you're new to chess, notice that the knight is starting on a dark square in this illustration, and all of the squares that the knight can move to are on the opposite color light square. So that means every time the knight moves is alternating between light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. So if we look at the classic fork, notice that we're forking the king and the queen, and the two pieces being forked are on the same color, and the knight doing the forking is on the opposite color, which means that before I deliver the fork, I have to start on the same color as the two pieces I'm forking. So we have dark, dark, dark. Now we have a potential for a fork. So if we look at a couple of quick examples, king and queen on the same straight line, we have dark, dark, dark. We have the potential for a fork. A little bit closer together, king, queen on the same straight line, we have light, light, light. We have the potential for a fork. Now, obviously, this is not always true. So in this position, clearly the black king and queen are not on any common straight line, but we still have dark, dark, dark. So we still have the potential for a fork. I think this is why the knight is so tricky from a visual standpoint. If we go back and look at the initial position here, it's like, well, duh, yeah. I mean, the two pieces on the same straight line is pretty easy to see that. But when the pieces are spread out, kind of jumbled up out in the open, it's a little bit more difficult, a little trickier to see these kinds of forks. And a lot of my students starting out, they're like, man, I always fall into these knight forks, those tricky knights. Well, if you know this, well, now maybe you're a little bit more observant when your two heavy hitters, kings, queens, or rooks, or your minor pieces are on the same color, and then your opponent's knight is on the same color. Maybe that's a red flag for you. Hey, I have to watch out for this. Now, while we're on this subject of knights, I thought I would throw in this little pro tip, this little golden nugget for you here. So let's say that black has just checked us here in the end game. Now, a king has 8 different squares that it can go to, right? So let's say that, I know white doesn't have another piece right now other than the pawn, but let's say that we had another rook or another bishop on the board, and I'm worried about, say I'm in a time pressure, I'm worried about getting forked by the knight, right? So of these 8 squares that the white king can go to, which of those 8 squares do you think is best to avoid additional checks by this knight? Now, this will be the first of many times where I'm going to ask you guys to pause the video. Go ahead and pause now. Which square is correct? Okay, so the correct answer is king to e5. The reason for this is because when, again, straight lines, when the white king is on the same straight diagonal as a knight with one square in between them, right? One square in between, it will take the knight 3 additional moves to give another king a check, assuming the king doesn't move again. Okay, so let's check this out. If I can't go to that square, that's illegal. If I go to one of these dark squares, the knight can check me on the very next move. So if I go here, that's an immediate check. If I go here, that's an immediate check. Let's say that I had a rook on this square, right? I go to this square, it's like, man, I just fell into the fork, right? If I go to this dark square, the knight checks me in one move. If I go to one of these 3 light squares, it will take the knight 2 moves to give me a check. So let's say I go here, now it'll take knight 1, 2 moves. Or let's say I go here, it'll take the knight 1, 2 moves, perhaps. If I go to this square, it'll take the knight 1, 2, or maybe 1, 2 moves to give me an additional check. But if I go to e5, it takes 3. The knight's going to have to do something like 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, right? So you can feel safe knowing that it's going to be a while before the knight checks you again. So little golden nugget, file that away in your chess toolbox, especially for time scrambles. Okay, whoa, what in the heck is going on here? So yeah, we're being invaded by knights. This looks like the horde variation of chess. Kind of reminds me of that scene from Game of Thrones where the Night King resurrects the dead and kind of respawns everybody and got more White Walkers. Epic scene from a fantastic series. So we are graduating one more level up, getting a little bit more advanced. Why do I have all these knights on the board? Well, if we look at this from the white perspective, if I were to ask you guys which of these 4 central ranks is best for a white knight in general, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th rank, what would you say? Pause the video now. Okay, so the answer is the 5th rank. Why is the 5th rank better? Well, you probably heard a lot of times about the 7th rank for white. If we're able to get 2 rooks to the 7th rank, we are infiltrating black's camp. We're getting behind enemy lines. Obviously, for black, it would be the flip. It would be the 4th rank trying to get to the 2nd rank. If you're on the 5th rank, you are only 1 move away from the coveted 7th rank from a knight move, right? Okay, let's go deeper. So let's clear this away. Of the 8 squares on the 5th rank, which one of these individual squares would you say is best for a white knight? Pause the video now. All right, what did you say? Answer is F5. So why is F5 better? Now, the D5 square is almost equally good, but the F5 square is a little bit better. Why is this so powerful? I was introduced to this concept by a very good international master years ago. Fantastic concept, really hammers the point home of certain pieces needing to be on certain squares. So going back to the beginning of this video, every time the knight moves, it alternates colors, right? So notice that the black king is on a light square on E8. If the king castles short, it's on a light square on G8. If it castles long, it's on a light square on C8. So the most dangerous square for a knight attacking your enemy king is to be on the same color square that that king is on. Let's strip this down even further. Check this out. So the knight on F5 or D5, the knight on F5 is the only square that no matter what king position, whether they castle long, short, or don't move at all, is the only square where I can check each king twice. So if you castle short, I can check you here and here. If you never bother to castle and stay in the middle of the board, I check you here and here. If you castle long, I check you here and here. Now, the D5 square does the same thing for each king position. I can still check you twice. So why is the D5 square not as good as the F5 square? Well, where does your opponent usually castle, right? 9 times out of 10, 19 out of 20 times, they castle on the short side. So you want your knight on this very important F5 square. Conversely, the same is true for black. So the white king starts on a dark square. If it castles short, dark, castle long, dark. So the knight wants to be on the f4 square, right? So we can do the same thing, check each king position in two different ways. Okay, so let's take all of those three things that we just talked about, wrap them all together, and let's take a look at some positions where we can apply it and start finding some tactics. Okay, so in this position, let's say that it is black to move, and let's say black plays pawn to d6. All right, pause the video. What would you play here as white? Okay, probably not a very hard tactic for most people to find. When I see this, you've heard me say it before, I'll keep hammering this point. Every move in chess weakens something, especially pawn moves. When that pawn moves up, it's no longer controlling those two squares, it's now controlling two different squares. So when this pawn moves up from d7 to d6, it is not guarding this anymore. It's not controlling these squares anymore. And so now the first thing I notice that jumps out to me is, king and queen, they're on the same straight line, right? Well, here we go. We have the very easy move, bishop to b5, pinning the queen, like we saw at the beginning of the video. That's protected by the knight. The queen is pinned. We're going to pick up the queen, and the black pieces are ready for another game. That's it. Game over. Let's say that black is a little bit smarter than that, and we have the same exact position. And let's say that let's say it's white's turn to move first. Pause the video. What would you play as white? Okay, some of you are probably thinking, oh, let's just play some normal developing moves. That's fine. Maybe you're thinking, well, he just talked about f5 and d5, right? So why not hop this knight into d5? That's not the best move, but for illustration purposes, let's say we play that. King hasn't castled. It's on a light square. I've got my knight on a light square. It's on a little outpost, right? And now let's say black plays pawn to d6. What would you play here as white? Pause the video. Did you find it? We still play bishop to b5. Yes, sir. Some of you are like, well, what that is? What? I can just take that. I hope you do. So the queen is pinned, right? And so if the queen takes the bishop, light, right? As we just talked about this, and we have the crushing knight takes c7, and we fork all 62 pieces that black has. So let's look at that again. The three things that we talked about at the beginning of this video for condition number one, location of the pieces, straight lines, paying attention to the color of squares that your opponent's pieces are on, and specific squares that your pieces want to be on. We just covered all three of those. Number one, right? Same straight line. Number two, we play this move, light. And number three, we are positioning our knight on one of the best squares for a white knight, right? And so we're able to find this tactic. And also, I just put out a video on this a week or so ago. We play this move. What's that tactic called? It's a decoy, right? We're sucking the queen out to a square she does not want to go to so we can deliver a tactic. And you play a move like this, and your opponent's going to be like, all right, guys, so now for the good stuff, the really cool stuff. So that was condition number one, position of the pieces, location of your opponent's pieces. Condition number two is unprotected or undefended pieces. Now, before I continue here, I want to take a look at this position here, and I want us to look at black's dark squared bishop on b4. I'm going to ask you guys a simple question. Is this bishop unprotected, yes or no? Pause the video now. Okay, so I'm imagining most of you guys, if I had to guess, probably 80% of you guys said, no, this is not an unprotected piece. Clearly, it's defended. So raise your hand if you said, no, that bishop is not unprotected. Okay, if you raise your hand, put it down immediately. That's weird. I can't see you. So if you said no, welcome to my buzzer. You're like, what? This is an undefended piece. Okay. You're like, wait a minute, clearly it's defended. Now, before I hold that thought, before I go there, let's take a look at this same exact position, but I'm going to take away both of the knights. Okay, white to play. Would you say that the bishop on b4 is an undefended piece? And 100% of chess players would say, well, sure, it's undefended. It's not protected. There is nothing that is defending or supporting this bishop. So if that's the case, do we have any tactics here for white? And the answer, go ahead and pause the video, see if you can find it. Yeah, not too hard to find. So we have the simple tactic, queen to e4. That's check. We're forking the king and the bishop. The king or pawn blocks. We pick up the bishop. We're up a rook, and white is winning. Okay, let's go back to the original position. All right. Is this an undefended piece? Yes, it is, because watch what happens. We have one attacker. They have one defender. So all I need to do is snap off the bishop. The knight takes, and guess what, guys? We have the same tactic. Queen e4 check, and that forks the knight. And we're still going to pick up the knight, and we're up a rook. Did your brain explode? I'm telling you, when I first understood and realized this concept, it completely revolutionized the way that I thought about tactics. So now we have a brand new definition of what is an undefended piece. So whatever you thought an unprotected piece was, your definition, throw it in the trash can, okay? It no longer applies. The new definition of an unprotected piece is a piece, one of your opponent's pieces, that has the same number of attackers as defenders. Let me repeat that. An undefended piece, the definition is same number of attackers as defenders. So in this position, we have one attacker and black has one defender. I'm going to call that a 1 versus 1. Okay, one attacker, one defender. If we looked at this position, going back here, every one of you guys said, yeah, that's an undefended piece. I'm going to call that a 0 versus 0. We have no attackers and black has no defenders. Okay, so that's easy pickings in a lot of different positions for a tactic. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper. And now, instead of putting a knight here and here, now I'm going to add another set of knights here and here. So let's look at this position. Would you say this bishop is undefended now? Pause the video. If I had shown you this right out of the gate, everybody would say, that's not undefended. I got two defenders, right? With our new definition, we have 1, 2 attackers. Black has 1, 2 defenders. Same number of attackers and defenders. This is now an unprotected piece, because guess what? I'm going to make this exchange. I'm going to make another exchange, and we still have the same tactic, right? And this applies to 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, 4 versus 4. All those, higher up is obviously more uncommon. But I'm telling you guys, if you understand this concept, it's going to wreck your mind, right? You're going to be like, oh my gosh, how have I not been thinking about this the whole time, right? So one of my silly little analogies that I kind of came up with, kind of stupid analogy, but when you have the same number of attackers as defenders, you think about, I don't know, this piece is in the middle of the ocean, right? And we're the sharks, right? We're trying to find the vulnerable fish, right? Well, the black bishop has the ship, it's got the lifeboat, it's got the raft, it's got lots of protection, right? Well, I'm going to take away your boat, and then I'm going to take away your raft, and now you're swimming all alone in the ocean, and the sharks can smell that and can sense that, and there you go. We're coming in for the kill. Because if you think about it, when the attackers equals the defenders, every exchange, you're stripping it down all the way to a 0 versus 0. So this is a 2 versus 2. I strip it down to a 1 versus 1. I strip it down to a 0 versus 0, and the tactic will present itself, right? Mind-numbing stuff. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm going to take you guys through a series of a bunch of different drills. This is the training part of the video. There are not a lot of YouTube streamers out there that actually try to conduct training during the videos. I'm one of them, right? I'm here to help you guys improve your game. So you've got to participate in this for you to maximize your learning. You get the biggest bang for your buck here. And your buck equals $0 because I'm giving this to you for free because I want to help you out. All right. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to put a position on the board here. So let's take a look at this. And for now, just for now, I only want you to focus on zeros versus zeros. Okay, forget about ones, and twos. I've got several examples of those at the very back end of the lesson. Okay, we're only looking at no attackers and no defenders. Okay, so in this position, I want you to pause the video and count for white. We're playing as black. For white, don't look at black's pieces. Look at white's pieces. How many pieces does white have that say 0 versus 0? Pause the video now. Okay, so this will be the one time I do it. You'll never see me do this again for the rest of my life. So I'm going to take each piece one at a time. This pawn is defended by a pawn, so that can't be a 0-0. The bishop defended by the king. That's not a 0-0. Defended by 3 pieces. Okay, we don't include the king, right? There's no such thing as a tactic on the king. If you take the king, the game's over. This rook is defended. That's not a 0-0. This rook is defended twice. That's not a 0-0. That's defended by the queen, defended by the pawn, defended by the bishop and the pawn, defended by the pawn. The only piece that white has that's truly a 0-0 is the queen. Okay, so now under condition number 2, the condition is met. So that's when the alarm goes off. Bam, 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 puzzle alert, puzzle alert. Okay, the condition is met. Now I start looking for tactics. They may not be there, but at least I start looking and treat this like a chess.com puzzle. Okay, and this is probably not very hard for most of you to see. We simply take the knight, bishop takes, and we sacrifice the rook, and they can't take because that is a 0 versus 0. It's an unprotected queen. So you might look at it and say, yeah, that's just a normal puzzle. Okay, we're going to go a little bit deeper. Hold on here. Okay, so in this position, it is black to play. And let's say that black plays knight to f6. Okay, don't try to solve anything yet, right? All I want you to do, pause the video, count the number of 0-0s for black. Pause now. Okay, what'd you come up with? So we have the 2 rooks in the corner. Now, for the most part, the first several moves, first 5 to 10 moves, the 2 rooks in the corners are almost always going to be 0 versus 0s, and we're not really going to have a way to attack them, right? So these pawns are all defended. This is all defended. Everything's defended. That's defended. The only other piece is the rook. Okay, this is defended. So, okay, the condition is met, but obviously as you go through this practice, you'll be able to rule out very quickly. I already know that there's no tactic on the rooks, right? We're too early in the game. So, okay, no tactics available. Let's continue. So let's say that white plays bishop to d3, and let's say that black plays bishop to b4, pinning the knight. Okay, does that change anything? Pause the video, count the 0 versus 0s. All right, what did you find? Did that change anything? Yes, it did. Now this bishop that was on f8 is now moved to b4. This is now a 0 versus 0. We have no attackers, and the bishop has no support. 0 versus 0. Bah, bah, bah. Puzzle alert, puzzle alert. Okay, start looking for tactics. Do we have one? Pause the video. Yes, we do, right? Boom, bam. We have the check, right? So we're always looking for checking moves. So we check the king and we forward the king and the bishop. There is no knight here that can block that also protects the bishop. So whatever black does, we're going to pick up the bishop on the next move. Okay, let's keep going. And by the way, as I show these positions on the screen here, they're going to get harder and harder and harder. We're starting with some easy ones now. They will eventually get up to some master level stuff. Okay, now this is a common mistake that I see in a lot of French defense and Caro-Kann defense positions. Caro-Kann is one of my favorite openings of all time. I'm going to be doing a speed run on the Caro-Kann coming up very, very soon. So here we're playing as black, and let's say that white plays the move. Let's say that they play bishop to b5. Okay, pause the video, count all of the 0-0s for white. Okay, what'd you find? Once again, we got the 2 rooks in the corner, okay, very early in the game. But we also have the g2 pawn, so make sure you didn't miss that. The bishop moves, right? Every move weakens something, right? The bishop moves, and now this g2 pawn is undefended. Okay, the condition is met, puzzle alert. Do we have a way? So when you spot a 0 versus 0, now you have to find a tactic on it, which means you have to find a way to actually attack it, right? Do we have a way to put pressure on this pawn? Not really. I mean, we can sacrifice our queen for no particular reason if we want to, but so, okay, quickly we know that there's nothing there. Okay, are there any 0s versus 0s? Other ones, yes. The bishop is a 0 versus 0. And some of you guys are like probably pouncing, like, oh yeah, I see it. We just did this. So now we have the tactic queen to a5 and we get to win the bishop. So sorry. Thanks for playing. No, actually this doesn't do anything because white has the resource, knight to c3. They block the check and they are defending the bishop at the same time. So here's where you got to, think ahead, calculate ahead. So queen a5, might not be a terrible move, but maybe we have something better. Okay, so there's no tactic available. So let's say that we just play a normal developing move. Let's say we play bishop to d7. We get out of the pin. And let's say white plays pawn to c3. Okay, Pause the video. Has anything changed? Okay. So here, nothing has changed. We still have the same number of zeros. Do we have a tactic on the bishop now? Well, in order to have a tactic, we have to attack it, right? I got to say those slow so it doesn't sound like I'm saying the same thing. How do we attack this bishop? Well, we can play a6, but that doesn't do anything. They can just back up. That's not really a tactic. Okay. Any other way to attack this? We do. So here's a very common mistake. We have this nice little move. Knight takes e5. Wow. If you take the knight, I take your bishop, right? You take my knight, I take your bishop, and I just won a very powerful central d pawn. If you take my bishop first, well, knights are authorized to go backwards. We simply capture backwards. And now you've lost your central e pawn. And this is something that I really enjoy doing for you guys. And I really, truly feel like it's healthy and it's very beneficial to your learning. I'm going to open up my screen here. I'm going to do this on just a few of these training drills. I want to show you what happens to the engine evaluation when we find these very subtle tactics, or maybe we only win a pawn. So let me open up my screen here so you guys can see up here. So black is ahead, half a pawn or so, fairly neutral, pretty even. And so black plays bishop to b5. Okay, not a good move, right? You can see the evaluation -1, but we don't have a tactic. Let's say we get out. Okay, sorry, that was the other move. So we said we play bishop to d7, and now white plays c3. Look at that evaluation, guys. Look at that. We take, they take, we take. This is losing. Guys, this is losing. -2.2, -2.1. And we're not even in the like 5th or 6th move of the game. And white's already toast. Just absolutely amazing stuff when you're able to identify undefended pieces, 0 versus 0, 1s versus 1s, and take advantage of these potential tactics. All right, let's keep going. Next one here. So we are playing as white. It is white to play. Let's say we play a normal developing move like knight to f3. And in this position, let's say that black plays knight to f6, developing move. All right, pause the video, count all of the 0s for black. Pause now. Okay, what'd you come up with? Once again, 2 rooks in the corner. Anything else? We do have the g7 pawn, right? That's a 0 versus 0. Do we have any way to even attack it? Well, we can. I mean, sure. I mean, that's a great move, right? Nah. That don't do jack diddly stank. Okay, so we have nothing here, so we just continue. And again, guys, as you go through this, you may be thinking, gosh, I got to think about I got to count all these 0s every single time I make a move. That's going to take forever. Well, at first, yeah. Well, anything that you learn in the game of chess is going to take a while before you get comfortable, where you build up that speed, and you'll get to the point where it's like, all right, I already know there was no 0s on this position. They made one little move. I can see that doesn't change anything, and move on, right? You don't have to spend 30 seconds counting 0s versus 0s. But for now, we are going to go through that process to train our brain, okay? Part of the learning. So nothing there. So let's say that we castle. Black castles. Pause the video. Does that change anything? No. If anything, it helps, right? Because now the pawn is protected. Now the rook is protected. The only 0 they have is the rook in the corner. All right, let's continue. Queen to e2. And black plays b6. Okay, does that change anything? Pause the video. Okay, we don't have any new 0 versus 0s, but it does change the position. The only 0 they have is this rook. Well, this move now opens up a potential lane to attack the rook. So puzzle alert, right? Okay, pause the video. Do we have a tactic here? We do. And it's amazing. I'm sure probably 70% of you guys will say the wrong thing here, even though you might see the continuation. So you might think, okay, let's take the knight, bishop takes, and let's get that bishop to e4 and let's hit the rook. Nah, that looks good, but black can just play c6 and life is good for black. No problems there. Okay, so we don't play that. We take the knight, they take, we play queen to e4. Now we're threatening mate and we're threatening the rook. Remember middle game strategy number 6, right? Lining up a battery. What do we say about queens and bishops? Typically, the queen wants to be in the front, right? Because she's making mate threats. And now the rook is lost and the game is over, right? So don't be afraid. We've already castled. We're controlling the center. Don't be afraid. Be aggressive. Get that queen up to e4. Be aggressive.
Come on, you guys. Bring it in. Be aggressive. Be aggressive.
Okay, so before we continue, I've been talking about the rooks being in the corner, being 0-0s, and us not being able to touch those. But there are some exceptions to that rule, and this is one of those examples. So it's white to play here. Pause the video. What can you find? Yeah, so the rook is in the corner. On A8, it's a 0 versus 0, and normally we're like, well, there's nothing there. But here we have knight b6. Very clever tactic. The knight is trapping the rook, right? So if you don't take the knight, we're just going to win the rook, and if you take the knight, we win the exchange, right? So there are some exceptions to that. So don't just automatically ignore the rooks and blow them off, right? Okay, so let's keep going here. So we are black in this position, and white has played the move, bishop to b5, hitting our queen. So before we move, let's pause the video, count all the 0 versus 0s. Okay, what did you find? So the queen is a 0 versus 0. The bishop on the dark square is a 0 versus 0. That pawn's a 0-0, and that's it. Okay, well, our queen is hanging, so it's hard to think about tactics on these pieces when our queen is hanging. Now, their queen is hanging also. Do we have a way to attack the queen? We could play knight there, but they could even just, they can just even just give us a check and then take the knight. So there's nothing there. So we notice this is a 0-0. Let's say we play queen to d8, hitting the bishop. White drops their bishop back to d3 to cut off the attack. And let's say that we play bishop to c7. Maybe the bishop wants to get on this diagonal to check the king. And let's say that, or actually, I'm sorry, I forgot to go back here. So even I got a little ahead of myself. So after white drops their bishop back to d3, okay, pause the video. Let's count the 0-0s. Okay, so now this pawn is defended. So still these two guys. Do we have a way to attack this bishop? No, not really. We take the pawn. They have 1, 2 attackers. We have 2 attackers. They have 2 defenders. So that just loses a piece. So we have nothing there. Still no way to attack the queen. So we play bishop to c7. They play rook to f3. Here they come. The old caveman attack, right? That was, I think, middle game strategy number 8 for us, the old rook lift, right? So they're bringing the rook in, and they want to checkmate us caveman style, okay? Pause the video. Does that change anything? You betcha. So the reason I put this one in here is because you need to pay attention when your opponent disconnects their rooks, right? When they break up this connection here, like they did with rook to f3, now this rook becomes a 0 versus 0. Okay, do we have a tactic? Pause the video. Yep, not hard to find. Always looking for checking moves. Queen d4, bam, and the game is over. No matter what white does, maybe they, I don't know, block. We take the rook check. Maybe they block here or something. We bring the queen back, make sure we don't get caveman checkmated, and black is winning, right? Okay, let's keep going here. Now, this is a mistake that I see a lot in the London system. And for white, the London system is by far my favorite opening of all time. It's the from the white side, it's the opening that's helped me get up to the 2200 level and beyond. So very, very near and dear to my heart. I'll also do a speed run on this sometime in the future. But in this position, let's say that black plays bishop to d6, and they're challenging our bishop. Now, the computer will tell you to drop the bishop back to g3. I'll talk about that in the video. I like to just leave it here, let them take. I know that does double the pawns, but we get a Maroczy bind on the e5 square. When the moment is right, I will push pawn to f5, and I will rip open this structure. But anyway, so let's just say, if it were me, I would ignore this. Let's just maybe develop the bishop to d3 and black castles. Okay, let's go ahead and pause the video. Do we have any 0 versus 0s? Okay, we have the rook, and that's it, right? No way to attack the rook, so let's continue. We castle. Black plays c6. Okay, pause the video. Does that change anything? Nope, doesn't change anything. Rook's still in the corner. So let's say we throw that knight into e5. And let's say black plays knight b to d7. Pause the video. Does that change anything? And I'm always surprised during my lessons how few students actually pick this up. There is a new 0 versus 0. If I pause a few seconds, some of you probably are still looking at it going, what are you talking about? There's no 0 versus 0. And it's right in the center of the board. You're like, God, I didn't see the bishop there, right? Because this knight move blocks the communication of the queen and the bishop. So now the bishop is a 0 versus 0. Puzzle alert, puzzle alert. Okay, this is a chess.com puzzle. What do we have here? Pause the video. All right, in order to have a tactic on the bishop, we have to have a way to attack it. And so we actually have two moves here. Knight takes c6, but the more precise move is knight takes f7. And now their bishop is hanging. They don't have time to take our bishop because their queen is hanging. So it's better for us to try to mess up and destroy the shield in front of the black king. So we take the f7 pawn, we take their bishop. We're up an extra pawn. We could even play f4 and almost turn this into a stonewall type structure if we wanted to. But yeah, just white's winning here. It's plus 2.5. I see that a ton in the London system. All right, let's keep going here. We're starting to wind down a little bit. Okay, so in this position, we're playing as black, and white plays the move bishop to g4. All right, we got a lot here. Pause the video, count all the 0 versus 0s. All right, did you get them all? We have 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All of those are 0 versus 0s. So your brain might short circuit. How do I try to look for tactics on all those pieces? Well, here again, we can process of elimination. We can throw these out. No way to attack those. No way to attack the knight. We could attack the b4 pawn. We could just push, a5, but they could just take. There's nothing there. So we're looking at the light squared bishop. Do we have any tactics on the bishop? Pushing does nothing. Pushing does nothing. Okay. Do we have any other way to attack the bishop? We do. We can move the knight somewhere. Do we have a tactic here? Pause the video. We do. We have a nice little tactic. Knight takes c5. You might look at that and say, what? What are you talking about? I take your bishop, you take my bishop, I take your knight, and I am up a piece. And I'm very happy. We talked about this in one of my recent puzzle videos too, right? Just recently. We take c5, they take our bishop, we do not take back. We have the intermezzo, the in-between move, sneak the knight into d3, check, right? Always looking for checking moves. The king has to respond, then we take the bishop. And now when the dust settles, not only has white lost the c5 pawn, that's the least of their concerns. Now we have upgraded our knight to a much better square on this outpost, another middle game strategy. They've lost their bishop pair. The king can't castle. This pawn is hanging, and white is completely toast. I would love to, this is a great outpost, but they do have a piece of equal value that can challenge this, right? That's what we talked about in middle game strategy number 9. I would love to trade off my dark square bishop for their knight. Then I'd have a knight on a light square. They have the wrong color bishop, and this knight will stay there for a few years, right? And once again, I'm going to show you, this is another one of those positions. I want to show you the engine analysis and how much it swings based on a simple little move. If we go back to the original position, this is plus 0.8, right? It's white to move. White has a decent advantage. They play a very logical, normal-looking move. Bishop to g4. Look at that, guys. That is crazy. That's like a 2-pawn swing. So we play knight takes c5. They take, throw the knight into d3 check. They move. We take the bishop. Look at that, guys. I mean, they played an absolutely, completely normal-looking move, right? They just put the bishop on g4. And through this little tactic where we just won a pawn, it's completely lost, minus 2.2. White's toast, right? Just absolutely really cool, revolutionizing stuff here. So let me close this back up. All right. All right, one more, and then we're going to get to some 1-1s and some 2-2s. Okay, so white to play here. Pause the video. Does black have any 0 versus zeros? Pause now. Okay. Yeah, so in this position, black does not have a single 0 versus 0. Every time I do this lesson, nobody gets it. I mean, I'm talking about nobody. 0 out of 100 students see this. It's crazy. It's like an optical illusion or something. Black does have a 0 versus 0. And again, some of you guys are probably like putting on your binoculars. You're like, I don't see it. It's the queen. She's a 0 versus 0. I don't know. Maybe it's because we think the queen, she's like the mother hen protecting everybody else, but nobody's protecting her. I don't know. That is a 0 versus 0. Okay. So do we have a way to attack the queen? Do we have a tactic? The only ways we can attack, we can play knight here. Pawn takes. Don't see anything there. Knight to d5. Pawn takes. Don't see anything there. Decoy. We could try to draw the draw the queen out, right? Queen comes out, attack, but then she just goes back. Okay, so there's nothing there. Okay, so that's just another good example of puzzle alert, but there's nothing there. So we continue. We play rook a to c1. Black plays rook a to c8. Does that change anything? Pause the video. Okay, so no, actually that helps because now the queen is not a 0 versus 0 anymore. Okay, so we continue. We talked about this. Bishop to h6, trying to trade off this good defensive dark square bishop. Black says, no thank you, drops it back. Pause the video. Does that change anything? Nope. And so some of these you can just kind of go through pretty fast. If there's nothing over here, when they drop the bishop back, then you just know, yeah, that doesn't change anything. So within a few milliseconds, you move on to the next thing you're thinking about. Okay, so we play rook f to d1. We are double attacking the pawn on d6. So black drops the bishop back. So they are defending that twice. Pause the video. Does that change anything? Certainly not. Nope. Okay, so we continue. Play h3. Black jumps their knight into e5. Pause the video. Does that change anything? No, everything's still defended. We play a3 and black plays queen to a5, attacking the a3 pawn. Pause the video. Does that change anything? It does. Now the queen is a new 0 versus 0. Doesn't mean there's a tactic there, but puzzle alert, puzzle alert. All right, pause the video. Do we have a tactic on the queen? We do. We do have a tactic. This is very, very advanced, right? I would not expect you guys, most of you guys, to see this. And you're thinking, well, how do we even attack the queen? Well, we can push the pawn. You take here. They could drop back. It doesn't do anything. We have the disgusting knight to d5. Ew. That's gross. That is gross. And you're like, what? I can just take that. I can just exchange queens. I take your queen, you take my queen, I take your knight. What's the deal? Once again, you take my queen, and I have the very subtle intermezzo, knight e7. Thanks for playing. That hurts. So black is now in trouble. Wait a minute. Because this knight jumped into this square, they're threatening mate. How do I stop mate and defend my queen at the same time? Both of these are hanging. So how do I stop that? I know. I'll play queen to c7. What a disgusting move. And some of you guys, even after going through this lesson, some of you guys are like, man, I just don't have any shot of playing knight d5. My brain is just not wired to process these kinds of moves. Yeah, but going through this lesson, going through these drills, if you notice that the queen is a 0-0, all you got to do is start looking for ways to even attack that 0 versus 0 piece. Figure out all the ways to attack it and then kind of calculate from there. Well, this is one way to attack it. The only other way is to move the knight and attack with the queen. So you have this, you have this, you have this, you have this, you have this. And if you go through all these, and that's why I recommend when people are trying to learn, don't play blitz, don't play 3 and 5 minute. You're just not giving yourself enough time to apply these kinds of deep level advanced thinking skills, right? Play 15 minute, play 15-10. Give yourself time to think. You're like, all right, I know this is not going to work, but let me just visualize, think about it. I go here, they take my queen. I guess, oh wait, that's mate. Oh wait, How do they stop it? And then there you go. And then you start, and you're like, oh, I found a brilliant tactic, right? This is a brilliancy. Knight d5. So you play a move like knight d5, and your opponent has no choice but to look at you like this.
Flared the nostrils, try to lock in.
Not blinking either.
Take that, Perez.
Okay, guys, so now we're going to graduate to the next last level. So now, instead of just looking at the 0 versus zeros, I put a ton of emphasis, lots of examples on 0 versus zeros, because if you understand that, then looking at the 1s versus 1s, 2 2s, 3 3s, that'll be a much easier piece of cake for you, right? So here we're going to, not only are we going to count the 0 versus zeros, we're also going to include the 1s versus 1s, okay? Just those two. So in this position, we are black to play. So go ahead and pause the video. How many 1-1s, 0-0s does white have? Okay, so this is a 0 versus 0 pawn. Okay, do we have any tactic on it? Well, we can attack it, but maybe they just move their knight and defend it. We don't have a check to a double attack because the knight's there. This pawn is a 1 versus 1. Now, I will say when you have a much higher valued piece, a 1 versus 1, where they're not equal value, then you have to obviously take that into consideration. So that's not 1 versus 2. That doesn't count. That's a 0 0. This is a 1. This is actually a 2 versus 1, but again, they're higher value pieces, so that doesn't really count. This is technically a 1 versus 1, but again, it's a much higher value piece. So nothing there. So black plays g6. The knight could go to h6. That's probably the better move, but let's say that the knight drops back to g3. Does that change anything? It does, because now this is not a 1 versus 1 anymore. This is a 1 versus 2. So definitely not looking at anything there. This is still a 0 0. Okay, so let's keep going. Black develops bishop to e7, and white jumps their knight into f3. Pause the video. Does that change anything? It does. Now this is no longer a 0 0 because it's now defended, and this is no longer a 1 versus 2. Now we're back to a 1 versus 1, right? But still, this is a higher value piece, nothing there. All right, so let's say black plays queen to c3, and white wants to trade off the dark square bishop, so white plays bishop to g5. Pause the video. Does that change anything? Okay, it does. So now this is a 1 versus 1. We have one we have one attacker and one defender. Okay? Tactics alert, tactics alert. Okay, treat this like a puzzle. Pause the video. Do we have any tactics on the g5 square? We do. Okay, we're going to take the 1 versus 1. Let's strip it down to a 0 versus 0. Right, now this is a 0 0, and the tactic hopefully presents itself and reveals itself. Boom! Queen c1. That picks up the knight, and that is game over. Black is just up a piece. All right, let's keep going. So in this position, we're black. Let's say we play knight b to d7. Let's say that white develops her knight to c3. Okay, pause the video. How many 1-1s and 0-0s does white have? Okay, we don't have any 1-1s. That's a 1 versus a million. This is 1 versus 2, and other than that, we're actually not even attacking anything. That's a 0 0, that's a 0 0, and that's it. Okay, so nothing there. Let's say we hop our knight into c5, and white plays a very common move, bishop to h6. We saw this a couple of positions ago. They want to trade off the very, very important defensive dark square bishop. All right, does that change anything? Pause the video. It does. Okay, so this is now a 1 versus 1. And a lot of times in these types of positions against the King's Indian type setup or a perk, white wants to castle long, trade off this dark square bishop, and white wants to, middle game strategy number 3, pawn storm down the board. Okay, so this is 1 versus 1. Do we have a tactic on the bishop? Pause the video. You find it? We do. Okay, a little bit more advanced, right? So again, to have a tactic, we have to have a way to attack the bishop. We're already attacking it. Is there a way to even add another attacker to this bishop? Well, we could play knight to g4. That attacks it, and then white takes. Is there any follow-up there? Yes, maybe, but we just gave up a knight for it, right? So here, is there any other way to attack the bishop, this actually would work, but the correct move here is to take the e4 pawn. Okay, white does not have time to take the bishop because their queen is hanging, right? So actually, both of these moves will work for the same reason, but we might as well take a pawn with us, right? We play knight takes e4, and so whether or not they take with the knight or the pawn doesn't matter. They take with the pawn, say, and now how do we add another attacker? Queen d4 check, bam, right? And this, guys, is why you do not move your f pawn. Don't move your f pawn in the early parts of the game unless it's part of a very specific opening, right? All right, so we hit them with the double attack. They probably are forced to play g3. We pick up the bishop. Let's say if they trade or don't trade, doesn't really matter. Let's say they do trade. We take back. And when the dust settles, we've won their f pawn. But it's much, much deeper than that. Once again, this will be the last time I do this. I'm going to open up my screen and show you the engine evaluation. If we look here, white's in good shape. It's plus 0.5. So white is up half a pawn. We go here. And now they're up plus 1. Plus 1 for white. Look at that engine evaluation. Still plus 1. Look at this engine evaluation after bishop h6. That is a 4-pawn swing. 4 pawns. Not just the one physical pawn that we win, right? Almost a 4-pawn swing. Because after we find this tactic, we collect a very important flank f pawn. We remove their bishop pair, right? So now black has the bishop pair. It's going to be very difficult for them to castle. You know, this is under pressure. We're going to be able to break open the center. Middle game strategy number 2 with a pawn push. And this is white is completely lost because of one simple, again, very, very normal looking move. Who doesn't play bishop h6 here, right? So if you're not aware of this lesson, you just take, say you develop white castles long and they're starting to push. And this is, this could be some trouble here, right? Okay, so last one. Let's graduate to the last level for this particular condition. So now in this position, we're going to look for 0, 0s, 1s, 1s, and 2, 2s. All right, let's do it. It is white to play. So let's say that we could trade the light squared bishop. All right, that is a 1. We could go ahead and pause the video. That is a 1 versus 1. Do we have a tactic here? Takes. Do we have a follow-up? We don't. We could attack it with the queen. We could attack it with the rook, but then the knight just moves. We don't have a tactic there. Let's say white plays bishop to h3, eyeing down this 0 versus 0, right? Pawn. Let's say black defends. Rook f2, d8. Let's say that white plays knight to a4. Want to bring the knight to this juicy outpost. Put some pressure on the bishop. All right. White says, no, thank you. Drops the bishop back. All right, so let's stop here. Pause the video. 0, 0s, 1s, 1s, and 2, 2s. What do you find? Okay, that's a 0, 0. That's a 0, 0. This is a 1 versus 1. And that's it. Those are the only things that we are actually are attacking right now. We don't have a tactic on the pawn. Don't have a tactic on this. Don't have a tactic on this. Okay, so we keep going. Bring our rook to the c file. Put some pressure on c7. Black plays pawn to a5. Does that change anything? Pause the video. It does. This is a 1 versus 1. Okay, do we have a way to put pressure here? Now you start looking at moves like knight here, but it doesn't work. They just take, we take, they take, nothing there. Okay, so we keep going. All right, let's say we bring the bishop back because now we want to trade bishops because maybe we want to get this rook to c5 and put pressure on both of these pawns so we don't mind the trade. This is a really good bishop for black, right? It's a good bishop for white too, but maybe a little bit better for black. So black says, no, thank you. They put the knight in front. No, thank you. I don't want to trade my good long sniper on the diagonal. Okay. Does that change anything? It does. This is a 1 versus 1. Okay. So takes. We can attack it, but they drop back. I don't see anything there. Okay, so we keep going. Let's say we plop that 9 into c5. Again, we'd love for them to take. We develop, we upgrade our rook, get to a nice outpost. And again, black says, no, thank you. I don't want to do that. All right. Pause the video. Does that change anything? It does. Now we have a 2 versus 2. 1, 2, 2 defenders. Okay. Do we have a tactic on this square? Pause the video. We do. Remember, every move weakens something. You have to have that mindset, even though technically that's not true. You have to have that mindset. Every move weakens something. This knight move weakens the diagonal, right? So we have a 2 versus 2. So we strip that down to a 1 versus 1, strip that down to a 0 versus 0, and because the diagonal is open, now we have queen to b3. Boom. And the game is over. Just like that. All right, guys. So we did it. Congratulations, you made it through. It's about an hour-long video. I know this is one of the longer ones, but I promise you guys, if you will go and try to apply this, I promise that your tactical awareness and recognition will increase. Your homework, should you choose to accept it, is to go, and I never recommend this. I never recommend my students or people go practice on robots. I think it's almost a virtual waste of time. They don't play human-like moves. They just play a lot of weird stuff. So to me, it's better to play real people. This will be one of the exceptions. Your homework is to go find a robot, Lee Chess, chess.com, wherever you play. Find a robot that's maybe 400 or 500 points lower than your rating level and play the game. And don't even really try to win the game. I mean, just play normal moves. And your homework, your goal, the only thing you're going to focus on is every time that computer makes a move, count the 0 zeros, the 1s 1s, and the 2 2s. Start training your brain to look for condition number 1, straight lines, color of squares, specific squares. Condition number 2, the 0 zeros, the 1s 1s, and the 2 2s. Start training your brain to find those conditions. And when they're met, ring that bell, turn it into a puzzle alert, and see if you can improve in your tactics. Guys, let me know down in the comments below if you're able to apply some of these new concepts and ideas and you're able to find new tactics. I love to hear about it. So thank you so much, guys, and stay tuned for part 2. We'll see you on the next one.